Thursday, March 11th, and we are learning the laws of kosher in our kosher crash course. We're in lesson number 8. You can listen to all the previous lessons at youtube.com/Jewish Gardens. That's youtube.com/Jewish Gardens. And today we are learning about the laws of kosher eggs. What we've done in this course, and the goal of this course, is to be able to know everything that you need to know about kosher one step at a time in this kosher crash course. What we've done is that we've gone through the 33 main ideas, main concepts that you need to be aware of or wary of when you are observing kosher. And now we're going into the details. Last week we spoke about the laws of challah. Today we will be talking about the laws of kosher eggs. It's not so simple to just have an egg and assume that it's kosher. Hopefully you'll have a deja vu, a deja Jew experience today, as you recall something which you've already seen before, which is maybe something you've seen in the kitchen of your grandmother, your mother. Hopefully we'll be able to make that something meaningful of an experience here today. I don't see the people that are with me here today on Facebook. On YouTube, a little bit I see, but something, hopefully the Facebook is working. I'm hopeful. Hi, Andy. Nice to have you with me. I know Steve is here with us as well. And hopefully the Facebook is working. So, okay. Without any further ado, I'm going to go straight into it as we begin the laws of kosher eggs right here today. So what is the story of kosher eggs? How does it work? How does this law work? That eggs that are hatched, eggs that are laid by birds, which are permissible to be eaten, generally would fall into the category of kosher eggs. However, there are eggs that are not allowed to be eaten. It depends on the mother bird. If it's a mother bird that is, in the language of the Torah, in the Talmud tractate Bechoros, in the Mishnah actually, Bechoros chapter 1, Mishnah 2, it says, anything which comes out of a kosher or a pure bird is itself pure, which means if the mother bird is a kosher bird, then it's allowed. But if the mother bird is not a kosher bird, then it's not a kosher egg, right? So for example, ostrich eggs are not kosher to be consumed. Why? Because they are from a non-kosher bird, obviously. Now, even if you do have a kosher mother bird, but the mother bird, which was kosher, became non-kosher, became treif, how would that work? We've discussed earlier in the crash course how certain illnesses can render an animal treif by virtue of the fact that the illness is going to cause that animal to die within 12 months. So if subsequent to the shechita, to the slaughtering, let's say the mother bird gave birth to an egg, laid an egg, we want to eat the egg, but before we eat the egg, we notice that the mother bird is sick. And we look closely and we realize that the mother bird has an illness which is going to kill her within 12 months. Therefore, it's a treifa bird. Or if it was born from a nevela, from a carcass. Now, I'm not sure exactly how that would work. Can an egg give birth? Can a mother bird lay an egg after she became a carcass? Maybe it means that the bird was killed, became a carcass, and then they found the egg inside. Right. In that case, it would probably be able to qualify in this category. And then you have a kosher mother bird, a kosher animal, whose egg is not kosher. Can you ask him to step out or something? Thanks. All right, good. Now, there are two signs to a kosher egg, which comes from a kosher bird. That is like this. One side is sharper and the other side is more rounded. That's a sign of like a chicken egg. I guess that an ostrich egg. I remember I took my kids to Cape Town a couple years ago, and they had a stand on top of ostrich eggs. Have you ever seen an ostrich egg, Andy? Yeah. Ostrich eggs, they're huge, but they're very, very strong, and they're almost rounded, if I remember correctly. They're a little elongated, but they definitely don't have one side sharp and one side rounded like a chicken egg. They're more like a ball. We actually stood on top of these eggs, and they were showing us how powerful they were. I know that the Bushmen in South Africa would store water in them. They would make a little hole in the ostrich eggs, take out the egg, fill it up with water, stuff it with grass, and then they would bury it under the ground in the desert, in the Kalahari Desert, where they would use it as storage water, for storage. That's how they would survive in the Kalahari Desert. They probably still do it till today. I'm sure there's still Bushmen living out there in the Kalahari Desert. So that's one part of the one sign of a kosher egg. And the other sign is that the yolk is internal, and the what's the protein called? What's the rest of the egg called?
Egg white.
The egg white, the protein, right? The rest of the egg white is it's what?
Well, it's all a combination of protein and fat, but it's egg white and egg yolk.
Right, egg white and egg yolk. So the egg yolk is interior, and the what's called the chelbon is exterior. So I'm not sure exactly about how that works.
Egg white is the chelbon.
Egg white is the chelbon. Okay, yeah. So now, what happens if you have a kosher egg coming from a kosher bird? Good morning, Robert Saunders, Mickey Gottlieb, Dan Dubansky, and Hannah. Nice to see you, Hannah. We've got Andy here in person. It's definitely a step forward in terms of this pandemic that we're finally getting back to some sort of in-person services. Seems like we survived the year, a year in the virtual, right? We are having in-person Torah study for anybody that wants to join us in live in studio, right? So an egg that is from a kosher bird, but can still not be kosher. Why? If you find in it blood. You know, blood is biblically prohibited. You're not allowed to eat any blood. So let's see how this works. You're not allowed to eat.
Or an embryo, or the embryo starts to get.
Well, it's interesting because not only is the blood in the egg, Andy, from an embryo, but sometimes you have non-fertilized eggs that also have blood spots in them.
Either of those two.
Both of them are prohibited, but it's not only blood because of the embryo. We'll see in a second. We're going to get into that in just a moment. So an egg that has a blood spot found in it, you're not allowed to eat it because of the prohibition of eating blood, as it says clearly in the Torah, in Leviticus chapter 7, 26, verse 26. It says, all blood you shall not eat wherever you live, not from the bird, not from the poultry, and not from the animals. Included in this prohibition is any stain or any cluster which looks red or black, right? If it looks red or black inside of the egg. However, if the stain is brown or a different color, then we're not concerned that it is blood and you're allowed to eat it. So again, the only prohibited colors in the egg, Charlie Midas, good morning, my friend from Chicago. The only colors that are prohibited in the egg are the color, when you're not allowed to eat blood, is red and black, okay? An egg which has two yolks inside of it, and you found blood on one of the yolks, the entire egg is still treif. You're not allowed to eat it from neither one of the yolks. Now, there are two kinds of eggs in chickens. Generally speaking, there's the fertilized egg and the non-fertilized egg. What does that mean? An egg that came from a chicken coop where there is a male, a rooster, right? Where there is a male, and therefore it was probably fertilized and has the potential of becoming an actual chick. And then there is a unfertilized egg, which means it came from a coop where there was only females. And therefore the egg was naturally formed from the female. You know, female chickens, they just naturally they make eggs every single day. The question is if there was a male to fertilize those eggs or not. So you have both fertilized and non-fertilized eggs, and you can clearly identify the difference because of the coop. Where there is no male, there could be no fertilization, unless you believe in immaculate conception, which is not anything which we're into. So an egg in which blood was found, there are 3 levels of prohibition. There's 3 different kinds. Oh, I see Miriam's in Florida. Nice to see you, Miriam. I heard that you were here the other day. Good to have you back with us, Miriam. Shalom, shalom. Okay, so there's 3 kinds of categories of blood found in eggs. If it is a fertilized egg which has blood found in it, in the membrane, which connects the yolk with the egg white, it's near the side, the sharp side, which connects the sharp side of the egg, which connects the yolk with the egg white, which is the place where the chick will begin to grow from. That kind of egg with a blood spot is biblically prohibited. Then you have a second category, which is a fertilized egg, which has other kinds of blood stains or in other locations of the egg. If you found it, so it's a fertilized egg and there's a blood stain somewhere else than the egg, not in that membrane between where the chick begins to go from, that would be not biblically prohibited, but only rabbinically prohibited. The third category of prohibition would be an egg which is not fertilized, an unfertilized egg, in which you find blood. How did it get there? I don't know. But you found the blood spot in there. It comes from a chicken. The chicken is a living animal. It got some blood in there, right? Clearly, it's not a fertilized egg, so it couldn't be the source of life. It's not the beginning of a chick. So such an egg is also prohibited, not biblically, not even rabbinically, but only because of a category that we call marit ayin, which is the perception of the eye. Only because we don't want to give the false perception. You know, they say perception is everything, right? We don't want to give a false perception, and therefore we don't want anyone to think that you're eating a non-kosher item, like a non-kosher blood, right? We discussed this idea when we were talking about meat and milk. You know, you're not allowed to mix meat and milk, but what happens if at the end of a meat meal, a meat wedding, let's say, you're serving coffee? You're serving coffee, and at that coffee is made out of soy milk, or it's made out of rice milk, something which is not dairy. You actually have to put up a sign that explicitly says this is not dairy milk, because we're not allowed to give the marit ayin perception, right? So a fertilized egg which has blood found in it, the entire egg is prohibited. It's not like you can just take out the little part of the blood spot and eat the rest of the egg. That's why when you check your eggs, and this is something that you may recall from seeing your mothers, your bubbies, your elder bubbies doing. You remember this, Andy? Where they would check their eggs, and we do it till today. You know, in our house, only Jewish people are allowed to check the eggs. You know, you don't subcontract that to anyone else who might be doing the cooking in the house. And what you do is that when you check the egg, you don't just put it straight into the dough or into whatever you're making. You put it into a cup, check it in the cup, and then after it's certified, you know, that there's no blood, you checked it in the glass cup, then you put it into the dough mixture. Because if you put it straight into the dough mixture, if you find blood in there, now you got a big problem, because the whole thing that you're cooking, everything now just became non-kosher, right? A blood spot that was found inside of a non-fertilized egg, since essentially the prohibition is only because of marit ayin, because of perception of the eye. Therefore, essentially, you are allowed to throw away only the blood and to eat the rest of the egg, because it's a non-fertilized egg. However, if you can afford it, if you can deal with it, the custom is to throw the whole thing out. Now, obviously, you're talking about earlier times, hundreds of years ago, even 100 or 50 years ago. People didn't have that much money. You know, if you sold a few items means you had what to eat today, means you could buy 2 eggs and feed your family. Throwing away one of those eggs was a major consideration. Today, hopefully, most of us have a somewhat more comfortable reality. Yes, exactly. Andy tells me about how you grew up in Romania, where you literally had to heat up the water on a stove, I think you told me, to have a hot bath. Right. That's a totally different experience.
Eggs to my uncle, the doctor, in the city, because he didn't have eggs.
You had to bring him eggs. He didn't have chickens.
Bring him eggs from the farm. We used to be like on a farm. So when we come to the city, we bring them eggs.
My father would tell me. My father would tell me how growing up in Jerusalem, they would have. There was no refrigerators. There was no freezers. What did they do? They would actually have to have like an ice box. It was a whole system of ice boxes where they would have to bring ice. Yeah, in order to be able to cool, keep the food cool. It's a different reality.
But today they came up with like technology, quote unquote, years ago, about 20 years ago, 25 years ago. They developed this thing where they had special lights where you could see inside the egg.
Fascinating.
So you can make sure that there's no red.
Before, you can see that even before that the egg is interesting. Very interesting. Okay, let's keep on going further. So now what happens if you had a non-kosher egg? If you had, let's talk about a fertilized egg, which got mixed up with other eggs, and now you found the blood in it, right? So let's say you had a fertilized egg, which is biblically prohibited, and you found blood in it in a way that is biblically prohibited, and now got mixed up with other open eggs. What can you do? You can remove the other yolks, the yolks that didn't have the blood spot, and you can eat them, but the yolk with the blood and all the other egg whites, you have to be thrown away. So in other words, the reason why you can eat the yolks that don't have blood is because they clearly weren't part of the original egg. The yolk with the blood, that's the one you got to throw out. But the yolks that don't have the blood spot, they clearly are from the other eggs. The egg whites, you'll never be able to differentiate. That's why all the egg whites have to be thrown out. Now, yolks that are connected, and you can see the whites coming straight out of them, you can, in those cases, you can take the egg whites as well. Because it's pretty obvious that the egg white is connected to that particular kosher yolk. Now, what happens if you cook them all together? If you did indeed cook them all together, then they all become non-kosher, because that's the basic premise of kosher, is that heat is one of the main mediums through which flavor is spread. When you heat something non-kosher together with something kosher, then what happens is that the entirety of the item becomes non-kosher, because the non-kosher spreads throughout. And therefore, you have to throw out the food and also you have to kosherize the dish in which it was cooked. However, if there's more than 60 times of kosher eggs, of kosher components in the pot, then the egg that was non-kosher, then you're allowed to eat all the other eggs, because the prohibited egg is nullified in the mixture. Just to explain how that works. So let's say you had one non-kosher egg mixed with 100 kosher eggs, right? Now, bear in mind that the non-kosher egg, the nullification of 60-1 is not 60-1 to the blood spot. It's 60-1 to the whole egg, right? To the whole non-kosher egg. So when you do your 60-1 ratio, it's not to the size of the blood spot alone. The whole original egg is non-kosher because it's a fertilized egg. So what you do now is that if you realize that you have 100 eggs that are kosher and only one which is not kosher, and you already ex post facto you cooked it together, you can't say, well, I'm going to cook it, I'm going to nullify it. You're not allowed to do that. You can't say, I'm going to nullify a non-kosher flavor. That's prohibited. But ex post facto, if you already did it, then now what happens is then the prohibition is nullified, because you can no longer tell the difference of where the original prohibition was. It's nullified and you can eat it. We discussed a similar idea yesterday when we spoke about the nullification of chametz before Pesach, before the onset of the prohibition, which was different to when you had chametz mixed in with a substance during Pesach, when it's already prohibited. Chametz is a very severe prohibition of consumption, to the point that it's never, ever, ever nullified, not even in a million. But a regular non-kosher blood spot, a fertilized egg, is not subject to the degree of prohibition of chametz on Pesach, and therefore it's nullified 60-1, like any standard non-kosher item, like pork, for example. Right? Just to clarify, by the way, that if, let's say, you had a soup and some pork broth falls into the soup, again, it's ex post facto, that would also be nullified 60-1. But if you had an original piece, like a piece of pork, a piece that falls into the soup, then the flavor of that piece would be nullified 60-1 volume-wise, right? By the volume of the piece would be nullified, but you still have to remove the original non-kosher piece if you can identify it. Obviously, in the case of a solid, right? Okay, so far so good. Good morning, Elaine. I see you with us too.
Why would you have pork if you're making kosher soup?
If it happened, akasha famaisa, we say in Yiddish, right? A question on a story. It happened. That's what happened. That was the story. Hypothetical. That's right. Now, if you have a doubt, if the blood is in the place which is biblically prohibited. Remember, there's two kinds of prohibitions. There's in a fertilized egg. There's a biblically prohibited one, which is the meeting point of the yolk and the egg white, which is where the chick begins to grow from. Or if it's not in the biblically prohibited area of the egg, which is only the rabbinically prohibited portion of the egg, if you have a doubt, right? And that egg, which you're not clear about, got mixed with other eggs, then what you do is you just remove the original prohibited area, and you can eat the rest of the eggs because it's subject to a lesser degree of prohibition. It's considered canceled out by a majority, because that's only a rabbinical prohibition. It's a different category of prohibition. So in that case, when it's only a rabbinical prohibition, it's okay to cancel it out just by a majority. Okay. Now, what happens with an egg which is not fertilized? They got mixed with eggs and then had blood found in it. So this is now the third category of egg, the one that was not fertilized. So you have a non-fertilized egg, which the original prohibition is so weak. It's only a marisain. It's only a perception prohibition, right? It's not even rabbinically prohibited. We just don't eat it because it doesn't look right. So if that egg got mixed with other eggs, with kosher eggs, then what you do is you just remove the original yolk with the blood in it and throw it out. Everything else is permissible. Similarly, okay, fine. So now the pot in which you cooked this kind of egg, an egg which was not fertilized. So the pot that you cooked an egg with a non-fertilized egg with blood, right? So what's the law of that pot? What you do is you leave it for 24 hours unused. And after 24 hours of not using that pot, you are allowed to use it again. And it is no longer needing to be kosherized anymore. What's the concept of 24 hours? What's this idea of 24 hours? The idea is that after 24 hours, the principle in halacha is that the food or the flavor in the walls of the pot becomes blemished. It's called noisein ta'am lifgam. The flavor embedded in the walls of the pot is now blemished. Non-kosher flavor is only when the flavor is intact. But if it's become blemished, then it's no longer subject to the intensity of the laws of non-kosher, which is, by the way, the reason why in many cases when we kosher vessels, more often than not, there's certain exceptions, but most often we kosher the vessels after 24 hours. After 24 hours of non-use, right? So let's say you pour boiling water in your kitchen sink. It's got to be after 24 hours of non-use, because at the end of the day, by just waiting 24 hours, you're already canceled out the intensity of the prohibition. And then when you're adding on the boiling water in your sink, you're now finishing up the kosherization, which is very interesting, by the way, a difference between kosher certification agencies.
Difference in this regard between metal pots and the earthenware pots?
No, there wouldn't be no difference to that. Now, the question is if you can even kosher earthenware pots. I mean, you can't, because the flavor never leaves the earthenware pot. That's a different story.
It absorbs.
It's not kosher. It absorbs the flavor, but doesn't release the flavor. That's the laws of kosherizing, which is what substances can and cannot be kosherized. You know, when we were considering a sink for our home.
To the egg, a pot, an earthenware pot that held an egg with blood.
Right.
That's also
an earthenware pot that held an egg with blood. Yeah. So you're talking about a non-fertilized one. In this case, you're talking about in this case of the non-fertilized egg, probably you could just wait 24 hours. Yeah, because again, the flavor in the very first place, the forbidden flavor was never even biblically or rabbinically prohibited. Yeah. Now, the idea here is just to point out to you that when it comes to kosher certification agencies, you look at certain agencies and you say, well, this one's reliable and this one's not reliable. Right? Why is it like that? Aren't they all subject to the same laws? And the answer is absolutely not. It depends on the God-fearing rabbis who run those organizations and what kind of corners they cut and what kind of corners they don't. So, for example, if you've got a wedding to do in a fancy schmancy hotel, and you're going to want to kosher the kitchen in the hotel, right? So if you're going to come in there and say, okay, we'd like to rent the hall for 12 hours, okay, it's going to cost you $25,000. But then they say to you, okay, but we want to wait 24 hours before we kosher the kitchen. Okay, that's going to cost you $75,000 to rent the kitchen for an extra 24 hours or $50,000. Now, this becomes a problem with how things work, right? So certain agencies might be more lenient than others, and that's where you get politics, where people say, well, I eat this hechsher, but I don't eat from that hechsher. Right, in Israel, this is very, very intense about which kosher certification you eat and which one you don't. This particular point of waiting 24 hours is a big deal. Some certification agencies say that there's other ways of canceling out the flavor by just pouring bleach all over the place, and they thus nullify the flavor, quickly, because you need to hasten the time. You can't just shut down the hotel for 24 hours, right? That's a very interesting discussion, which we'll discover as we go further through this kosher crash course. Let's wrap it up. Eggs that are being sold in the stores from different companies. We relate to all eggs as we assume that all eggs that you buy in the store are non-fertilized eggs. because the vast majority of eggs sold in stores are non-fertilized eggs, and therefore there's a principle that we can go after the majority. Therefore, eggs that were mixed together, and you found blood in one of the yolks, what you need to do is just take out the yolks, that yolk with the blood, and throw it out, and we can assume that everything else is kosher. All the other yolks and all the other egg whites are kosher. Why? Because we're assuming that it is the category of a non-fertilized egg, which we just discussed, right? And the pot in which you cooked an egg with blood, again, you just assume that it's a non-fertilized egg status. You leave it for 24 hours without using it, and no further kosher certification, kosherization is necessary. So, if I'm not mistaken, guys, help me out of here. When you go to the store, when you go to Publix, the white eggs are the non-fertilized one. Is it the brown eggs that are fertilized? Is that how it works?
I never buy brown.
You don't buy. Yeah, we never buy brown eggs.
I never do.
Right. You know anything about this, Andy? We never buy brown eggs because those are the ones that typically have blood spots in them. The white eggs typically don't have blood spots in them. I'm not sure what the difference is. If anybody here on the social media channels is able to help us and understand why is it that the brown eggs typically have more blood spots than maybe because they're free range. That's why. They're free range chickens. That's probably why. So they're hanging out. They're like organic. They're living their natural lifestyles. They're not living in a coop with the lights on 24 hours to trick them into laying more eggs, right? So the white eggs are the ones that are not free range. Yeah, Mickey says commercial eggs are all candled before sale. I don't know what candled means, Mickey.
The lights there, I was telling you.
Oh, candled, the lights. Okay, fine, before sale. No fertilized eggs are sold in local supermarkets. Okay, so you'd probably get the fertilized eggs in like the green markets. You know, some guy is raising chickens in his backyard, right? That's probably where you'd find the fertilized eggs. But like it says over here, like I just read to you, that the general majority, the vast majority of all eggs sold are non-fertilized eggs, so you don't have to worry about it unless you bought it in the farmer's market, unless you bought it from your neighbor. Your neighbor brought over some eggs. You're like, whoa. You know, we actually have a friend here in the community who has chickens growing in his backyard. So when he brings us a bucket of eggs, we're always very careful that, we're always careful with blood spots. Always, because that's basically the result of here. You always check every single egg, right? But with his eggs, you're extra careful because, you know, those are much more likely to have blood spots. Mickey says more difficult to candle a brown egg. I don't know why it's more difficult to candle a brown egg. Isn't that a function of just turning on the lights? Isn't that what candling means? Maybe I misunderstood what you meant. Okay.
No, it's the lighting that they use on these like conveyor belts or whatever, you know, so on and so forth. I don't know why, but they are set to easily read what's in white eggs. It's possible that those, you know, because they're brown, it's very, very hard to see. I don't know why. All I can tell you is my brother-in-law in the Moshav used to have a huge chicken coop with 20,000 chickens.
Okay.
And, you know, they used to lay only white eggs.
Well, Mickey says the difference between brown and white eggs are the breed of chicken, nothing to do with fertilized or unfertilized. Interesting. Okay. So we shouldn't differentiate. We shouldn't judge our Publix eggs by the color of their skin, but rather by the content of their character, is what you're telling me here. Okay, fine. Fair enough. That's what we're going to have to do then, Mickey. All right. Okay, so now just two more points over here. The caution that we have to exercise with eggs and eating them. Somebody who wants to fry an egg should first pour the egg into a transparent glass and check it to make sure it doesn't have blood. So you crack it open, making sure that you don't smash the yolk. You want to be able to keep the yolk intact. Don't just like smash it. You open it gently. You know, you tap it on the glass. You open it up, that it comes out complete, of the yolk and the egg white, to make sure that there's no blood. If you forgot to check the egg and they got mixed in with the food, then you're allowed to eat the food because we go after the majority. The most eggs don't have blood. It's a rule. It's a kosher rule. Right? Right. It's a very general rule which applies to many, many, many parts of Jewish law, way beyond kosher. It's a status of people, right? It's a status of, when it comes to marriages, there's all sorts of applications that we use when we say that you go after the majority rules. Now, someone who wants to cook eggs, there's a custom not to cook eggs. Sorry, there's a custom to cook eggs in odd numbers. And at least to have 3 eggs together. So that, what's the purpose of this idea? So that if you'll find blood in one of the eggs, there will be a majority, right? There will be a majority of kosher. Interesting, right? And even the pot itself will not need to be koshered, right? And when you take them out of the pot, there's a custom to, when you take the cooked eggs out of the pot, there's a custom to, now, by the way, we're talking now about cooking eggs whole, right? Like within their shells, right? Because when you cook the eggs, you don't know if there's blood in that egg, right? So let's say you're taking, what do you call them? Shelled eggs? Is that what they're called? Shelled eggs? So you're cooking an egg, right? Hard boiling eggs. There you go.
Hard boiled or soft.
Right.
Very good. Or hard or soft. Now, when you're cooking the egg in the pot, if that egg has blood spot in it, then you essentially trafed up your pot. So what do you do?
For 24 hours.
But what happens if it was biblically prohibited? What happens if it was a fertilized egg? Then you got to really kasher the pot, right? So what do? When you cook the egg, you do it in a majority. You do it in odd numbers with a minimum of 3, so that you can safely assume that there's a kosher majority. Again, using the principle of roiv, of majority. When you want to take the eggs out of the pot, what you do is you got to be careful to fill a pot of cold water and to cool them down, and not to take them out with a spoon. Why? Because when you take them out with a spoon one at a time, if you'll find one of those eggs which has a blood spot in it, then the spoon is treif, right? Remember we mentioned earlier in a previous class that if you had a fly in your soup, right? And the fly was nullified 60-1, you can eat the soup, but if you took it out with a spoon and it's boiling hot, then potentially that spoon just became treif. So you want to pour it out instead of spooning it out. You understand the difference? Because in the size of the spoon, you don't have enough to be 60-1 when it's hanging out there in the spoon, if it's boiling hot, right? If it's not boiling hot, it's a different story, because the flavor doesn't spread when it's not boiling hot, right?
Boiling hot is when you need the spoon.
I know, but you could pour it. You could just tilt the pot,
Pour all the hot water in.
or you could put some ice in it and take the spoon out. Take it out with the spoon, right? Now, so what you do is you don't want to take it out with a spoon, because then what happens is if the egg turns out to be with blood, then you have to clean the spoon. You have to kasher the spoon. Also, you want to make sure that you don't ever have 2 eggs together in the pot remaining, right? Because if one of them has blood, then the other one also becomes non-kosher because it doesn't have a majority. It's 1-1, right? Interesting stuff. Someone who wants to, let me see how to translate this word. How do I say this in English? Someone who wants, I think it means to gargle.
What's the word?
Ligmoa.
Yep.
Ligmoa. A gmiat of an egg is like a gargling, right?
Yep.
So somebody who wants to gargle a soft egg, right? I think the cantors do that, right? Who does this kind of stuff? I remember a cantor back in South Africa used to gargle eggs before he used to sing, yeah. Do you know anybody else who does this in Romania that ever did this? No? So somebody wants to gargle an egg, and he's allowed to pour it straight into his mouth. You take, apparently that's how you do it. And he's not obligated to first check it into a cup and then pour it into his mouth. Because again, you go after the majority rule.
Sylvester Stallone in Rocky.
Oh, is that what he did in Rocky?
Yeah.
I heard he just bought a place down here in Palm Beach.
Yeah, I heard that too.
We should ask him. We should bring him here to Shul, Sylvester Stallone, and ask him how he did it in Rocky. Did he first check the egg?
Yeah, but he may call us racist. I don't know.
So again, you got that basic principle, which you'll see coming up principles in kosher, the principle of the majority rules, that you can assume that most eggs are not bloody, and therefore you can pour it straight into your mouth. Similarly, you don't need to check hard-boiled eggs. Rather, you can eat them right like that without having them checked, because you can assume that they are kosher. Now, one final thing I want to share with you before we close is that an unpeeled egg that remained overnight, you're not allowed to eat it. Interesting, right? You're not allowed to eat an egg that stayed overnight unpeeled, even if it was closed in a bag and inside of the fridge, because, I'm quoting now, an evil spirit rests upon it. Yeah, an egg that was mixed into a salad, or even if it had salt on it, or even just oil, and it spent the night like that, that is allowed to be eaten the next day, because through this minor change of the salad or the salt or the oil, it doesn't attract the evil spirit. Interesting stuff. Unpeeled eggs, which means hard-boiled eggs without peeled. I'm talking about. Did I say unpeeled? I'm sorry, I meant peeled eggs. Did I? Peeled eggs.
Without the shell was taken off already.
Right.
Because you can buy bags of shelled eggs.
Shelled eggs. So shelled means that the peel is off.
Hard-boiled eggs, the shell was taken off.
Well, if there's some salt on them, it's fine. But if there's not, then you can't eat it. Even in a bag, even in the fridge, right? Now, what is egg powder?
Oh, I've seen that too.
It's like a powder of eggs?
It's powder, right. A lot of airlines use that stuff.
Dehydrated eggs?
Yeah, dehydrated, and then you reformulate by adding water.
Okay. So, and then what, becomes an egg again?
No,
they make scrambled eggs that way.
Really? Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so egg powder, you have to check that it has a kosher certification that verifies that they checked the eggs from blood and that they didn't spend the night unpeeled. Sorry, they didn't spend the night peeled before they were turned into powder. However, now that's why you need a kosher certification.
You can also buy in a container. You can also buy in a container the liquid egg. In other words.
Okay, so again, that's why you need a kosher certification.
Yeah.
However, after you made them into powder, even if they were overnight, if you left the powder overnight, that's not a problem, because through the change of the form, it was changed into a powder. It again doesn't have the evil spirit upon it.
So this evil spirit is a new thing. I've never heard of it.
Yeah.
And that's enough to make it non-kosher?
It's not that it's non-kosher. This is more of a spiritual concept. It's a warning, not a prohibition. It's a danger, it's look. We're actually gonna the next chapter in our kosher course is gonna be foods that are dangerous.
Evil spirits and food.
Right. It's an evil spirit. Something. Look, this is something Kabbalistic. It's not anything empirical. It's not anything rational. It's purely Kabbalistic. It's peeled eggs, hard boiled. Cannot stay overnight. Right. Okay. Now it's interesting that the kosher certification agencies are careful that when they do make the powdered eggs, they make sure that it has 4%, at least 4% of onion or garlic, in order to avoid this problem, that they wouldn't need to rely on the assumption that it's changed its form and therefore does no longer attract the evil spirit. They say, okay, we're going to add to it actual garlic or onion to 4% to make sure that it's truly changed. That's it. That's the bottom line.
That's a Romanian thing. That's a Dracula.
Oh, that's called Amit Sibyl. You know what Amit Sibyl is? Egg with onion. That's a big, I think it's a Hungarian, Romanian, Transylvanian food. My mother used to make it. What? Egg with Sibyl. That's it. We eat egg. I shouldn't use that to my house.
At the Seder table, you boil eggs with salt and water. That's it. That's what I call it.
Yeah, but you're not supposed to leave them overnight.
No.
All right. And if you do leave them overnight, add some salt. All right, folks, this ends tonight, this morning's Kosher Crash Course, The Laws of Eggs. Hopefully you learned something. We are having tonight a very, very interesting course on reincarnation. The reincarnation of souls. That's happening tonight at 7:30 p.m. That class is by registration for the JLI, the Jewish Learning Institute. If you would like to join us tonight at 7:30 for the class, you can register at jewishgardens.com/RSVP. That's jewishgardens.com/RSVP, or call the office at 561-624-2223. That's 624-2223. At 11:30 today, Corey gives a class on Hebrew language through the prayers of the Siddur. Join her on Zoom, jewishgardens.com/Zoom. Shalom, everybody. Thank you for joining me here today, and have a wonderful, wonderful day. Be safe.
Reincarnation, recycling of